All right, so we've talked a lot about like body composition, BMI, right? We talked about how to get them. We talked about like the obesity epidemic, like what's going on. Well, let's talk about desirable body fats. Um, and so we'll start with men. You can see it there in purple. Men, the desirable, most desirable or like healthy range or whatever, we're talking about 16% body fat. Obviously, you can be leaner than that. You can be more, right? Because you can see here that at 25%, you're considered to be over fat. They use that term when measuring body fat, like over fat versus overweight, right? Because we're not determining, it's not a weight determinant here. So what happens in between 16 to 25? All like normal ranges. And again, athletes will be a lot less. A lot of people can be less. Really we're worried about being malnourished or something. With women, it is 22%. At 30%, you're considered to be over fat. So obviously you can see that women store a little bit more fat, right? A lot of that is just reproductive purposes, right? Making sure that their internal organs in the body and whatnot are fully protected so that they can bring life into the world. And then you can see this last chart here in green, and that's not necessarily what their like target range is. It's kind of like what the body looks like throughout the course of its life, right? So you can see at 18, you're at 14%, you bump up to 25%, and then 22, 26, 31% by the time you get to 55. And if you looked at like weights, like people like tend to lose muscle mass and gain fat mass. So, what ends up happening is they kind of end up being around the same weight. You're looking at like, hey, I'm 180 pounds at 18 and I'm 195 at 55, and you're just like, 15 pounds over the course of my life isn't too bad. The problem is that, because the amount of fat that's being stored or that you end up like storing as you age, and naturally you're going to store more fat as you get older simply because you need to protect your body as you age from falls and whatnot. But again, this is just kind of giving you an illustration or an outline of like what ends up happening to the body. And again, those aren't desirable marks. It is just kind of like where the averages are. Obviously, they don't have information on everyone, but that's kind of like what it might look like, or like a healthy-ish person typically looks like. One thing I do want to note is like when you're talking about men and you're talking about desirable body fats, obviously depending on what your ability is, and when this applies to women too, but determining on like what your target goals are, or like if I'm a runner, like obviously I'm going to have less body fat simply because my body is going to adapt to exercises that it does. But like weight training and kind of where we want to be, like if you're 12 to 15% body fat, that's where you produce your most testosterone, right? So as you're going through and you're doing some bodybuilding or working out, like understand that having that target or that number is really going to be metabolically like better than adding on more or being too lean, especially when you're trying to add on mass, right? And then so those are your desirable body fats.